To the Indians, it was Pahayoki, the grassy water. To the early Spaniards, it was the lake of the Holy Spirit, a place of mystery and reverence. To noted conservationist Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, it was the river of grass. But by whatever name it has come to be known, it is nothing less than America's Everglades, a subtropical wetland unlike anything in the world. And crowning its northern frontier stands the Arthur R. Marshall Loxahatchee National Wildlife Refuge, one of the most remarkable wildlife sanctuaries in the world. The refuge was established in 1951 and renamed after noted scientist and Floridian Arthur Raymond Marshall, Jr., to serve as a place of sanctuary and protection for native and migratory birds and wildlife, and to restore and protect the last remaining stand of Florida's northern Everglades. From its formation 5,000 years ago until the early 20th century, the Everglades covered much of South Florida, a 100-mile swath up to 60 miles wide, from the lower lip of Mammoth Lake Okeechobee to the tip of southern Florida. Set on an extraordinary flat limestone shelf that tipped ever so slightly southward toward the end of the continent, the Everglades was, and is, a vast watershed. It gladly accepted the seasonal overflows of Okeechobee and the wellspring of lakes that dotted its headwaters, spilling out onto the land and flowing down, a vast, solid sheet of water moving almost imperceptibly over the flat surface. Layers of peat accumulated on the limestone bed formed an intricate fretwork of ridges ideal for the sawgrass sedge, which grew in abundance. Tree islands of elevated areas with hardwood trees punctuated the landscape, most carved into teardrop shapes by the trickling current. Sometimes the water puddled into deeper wet prairies, and deeper still into sloughs that wove throughout its vast expanse. As the water flowed, it fed not only the Everglades, but a complex network of interdependent ecosystems, from the cypress swamps that flanked its borders to the estuarine waters of Florida Bay and the vast and intricate patchwork of mangrove islands that spilled out into the Gulf of Mexico and the bays. The Everglades was a home to a mind-boggling array of birds and fish, other wildlife, and plants, so many and varied that a Spanish explorer remarked, "If we were to continue enumerating, we should never be through." It was the ultimate study in contradictions. As forester and conservationist Gifford Pinchot said, "It is a region so different that it hardly seems to belong to the United States." But for all of its subtle beauty and complexity, some imagined it to be a harsh land, endlessly wet, a vast expanse of shallow water and razor-sharp sawgrass that stretched as far as the eye could see, swarming clouds of mosquitoes, and alligators with gaping jaws and vociferous appetites, which explains in part the many plans and schemes to rid the landscape of what was considered nothing more than a useless marsh. And as civilization began to spring up around it, America decided that something must be done to tame the Everglades, and something was done.
By the end of the 19th century, the first canals had been dug to divert water out of the Everglades. Australian melaleuca trees were brought here, planted in hopes of drying out the marsh, which it could then be used for farming and development. But the plan didn't work, and the trees have spread with a vengeance.
In the decades after World War II, progress hit. Thanks to the advent of air conditioning, real estate development began booming in the hot, humid area, and infrastructure was needed to support the growing population. Answering Congress's call for flood control following devastating hurricanes in the 1920s and 40s, the Army Corps of Engineers obliged, constructing more than 2,000 miles of levees, canals, and water storage areas to channel water out of the Everglades when it was too wet, or to store water for human use when it was too dry. Crops were planted, natural water basins were redirected or filled in, homes were built, shopping malls were erected, highways crisscrossed the land, and suddenly, the interconnected sheet flow had been redirected, taking with it the waterfowl and fish, the plants and the animals that called it home. Soon, a full 1/2 of the Everglades' 9 million acres was gone, and some of what remained was an ecological tragedy, choking on the dirty water runoff of civilization and agriculture, and on the intrusion of invasive plant and animal species that thrive on it. Problems that present an ongoing challenge to those charged with managing and restoring the last northern stand of this delicate ecosystem.
This is the Arthur R. Marshall Loxahatchee National Wildlife Refuge. It's a vast 143,000 acre wetland marsh made up of the distinct plant communities that characterize much of the original Everglades. Remarkably, each one is distinguished from the other by less than a few inches in ground elevation.
The sloughs were water pools and streams that provide a habitat for swimming waterfowl, fish, alligators, and aquatic wildlife. The wet prairies, where vegetation sprouts in more shallow waters, serving as feeding grounds for wading birds. Tree islands, formed where submerged peat rises to the water surface, providing germination ground for shrubs, trees, and other plants, and dry footing for small animals and roosting birds. The sweeping sawgrass ridges that blanket the expanse of the wetlands and form the backbone of the Everglades ecosystem. And one of the last remaining and largest stands of the cypress swamp that originally bounded the Everglades. Hundreds of acres of bald and pond cypress rising majestically amid a dizzying sea of ferns and other vegetation, all providing ample opportunity to observe the wildlife who dwell there, wildlife who depend on its waters and vegetation for their survival.
There are many opportunities for the public to view and utilize the refuge and to observe indigenous wildlife unique to the Loxahatchee National Wildlife Refuge. We have many walking trails like the Cypress Boardwalk right here, our marsh trail. We also have a canoe trail and a bike trail.
U.S. Fish and Wildlife law enforcement personnel patrol the refuge to enforce regulations for fishing, boating, and hunting, which are permitted in designated areas. And because the refuge is an island in a veritable sea of civilization, restoring and managing the sheet flow of water within the refuge is crucial.
We face several battlegrounds in our Everglades restoration efforts. We have non-native species, both plants and animals. We have development right up against the boundaries of the refuge. We have poor quality water sometimes coming off urban and agricultural areas. But mostly when we're working with this, we really need to get the water right. The right places, the right time, and the right amount.
Indeed, the Loxahatchee National Wildlife Refuge is a land of water, and many tried to get the water right restoration efforts were put into place by the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan signed into law in 2000. Another measure has been to more productively use the refuge's unique water impoundment system. 10 artificially created water impoundments separated by earthen levees. Originally created decades ago to attract waterfowl, these impoundments can now serve as a sort of living laboratory and provide a physical research model for Everglades restoration.
The water impoundments on the refuge provide a mosaic of habitats that supports dozens of wildlife species. But they also provide a way for the public to experience some of what it would feel like if they were actually able to be in the vast interior of the Everglades.
And that opens up a world of educational opportunities for children to experience the Everglades.
Our teacher took us on a field trip to the Loxahatchee Refuge, and it was awesome. We saw the snail kite, and it was really endangered. We saw lots of birds and animals, even an alligator. We learned the refuge is the last part in our Everglades in this area, and we have to take good care of it.
2 of the 10 impoundments, divided into 4 enclosed 20-acre marshes or macrocosms, have been dedicated to the science behind Everglades restoration. Known as the Loxahatchee Impoundment Landscape Assessment, or LILA, a living laboratory that serves as a large-scale experimental model of the effects of water hydrology on the tree islands and ridges, wet prairies, and sloughs that characterize the Everglades ecosystem.
In order to restore the refuge, we need to restore the hydrology, or the historical flow of the Everglades. LILA gives us the opportunity to test techniques that we would use in the Everglades before we actually use them out there.
LILA is the largest constructed wetlands ever designed for research purposes. It's a living laboratory providing us with a blueprint to help us undo some of the damage.
Yet, not only is this vast aquatic haven a land of water, it is equally, and ironically, a land of fire. In fact, its very life depends upon it. A magnet of frequent lightning strikes, the refuge's Everglades ecosystem is very much a fire-dependent one. As sawgrass matures, it naturally sloughs off old growth, creating dense mats of dead vegetation. Fire has been nature's way of getting rid of the old growth and revitalizing the new.
Fire is absolutely key to the restoration efforts going on here at the refuge. It's perhaps the ultimate tool to manipulate the biology of the refuge, and we use it every chance we get, either through ignited prescribed fires like this one here, or through lightning ignited fires that occur naturally in the Everglades.
Fire, along with herbicide treatment, is also a means of ridding the refuge of invasive exotic species, like the old world climbing fern that blankets and collapses tree islands and chokes out native vegetation, like cattails and willow, 2 native species that thrive in the nutrient-rich runoff waters of civilization and agriculture, and that threaten to choke out natural vegetation despite the protection of stormwater treatment areas. Specialized wetlands designed to trap nutrients from local runoff water before it enters the delicate Everglades ecosystem. And the vast stands of water-loving Australian melaleuca trees that were introduced in the early 1900s to literally dry up the Everglades and make the area suitable for development and agriculture.
We use many different techniques. We have a whole tool bag of tools that we use. One of those is prescribed fire. We might burn an area to gain access to the trees, or we may burn the trees after we have applied an appropriate herbicide for this area. The whole reason for that is to keep the competition down between the native flora and the fauna and allow it to grow and flourish without the competition of the non-native exotics here.
Today, through effective management techniques and the contributions of many partners, large portions of the Loxahatchee National Wildlife Refuge are making positive strides, moving toward the open sawgrass savanna it once was. A sweeping mosaic interspersed with wet prairies, meandering sloughs, and tree islands. A place that welcomes and nurtures the hundreds of plant and animal species who live there today, and that encourages the dozens who are endangered and threatened to grow and thrive there once again.
The Everglades is not only a national treasure, it's a global treasure. Managing and restoring this treasure requires the collaborative efforts of many partners, from governmental agencies to concerned citizens. We all take this effort very seriously. We owe it to future generations.
Make no mistake, the Everglades has been permanently compromised. It will never again be the interconnected aquatic paradise it once was. But there is much that can be done to put things right as best we can. That remains the challenge, the trumpet call to action that drives managers of the Loxahatchee National Wildlife Refuge, our partners in restoration, and the heart and soul of America. With critical support of visitors like you, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service will continue to preserve, protect, and restore this unique national and global treasure.